So I wanted to talk today a little bit about a proposal that I've been working on, sort of to hopefully give us a better DOM API to work with in the browser. I've been working with different browser vendors. I've been working with Mozilla, the Internet Explorer team, and I've been talking with the W3C about coming up with a good API that we can all work with. So what the core of my proposal centers around is the NodeList. The NodeList is a highly underused object in JavaScript in the DOM. Right now, you can get a NodeList in a couple ways. You can get a NodeList, but if you want to do child nodes, for example, child nodes will give you a NodeList. If you do get elements by tag name, that'll give you a NodeList. Query selector all, that'll give you a NodeList. And all these NodeLists have sort of different states. Some NodeLists are static in that they just don't change. Like if you do query selector all, you'll just get back effectively a glorified array that isn't an array. It's much less useful than an array, and that's not changing. But if you do get elements by tag name, that's also a NodeList, but it's updated live. Every single time a new, for example, div comes into the page, that NodeList gets updated dynamically. There's also the concept of HTML collection. It's in the current specification, but it's also in HTML5, and it's not really clear why HTML collection exists, since it is just a NodeList. But so we have this kind of bastard child existing here that really should be killed off or something. But anyway, so what I wanted to do is take this concept of a NodeList, which is kind of neutered right now. It doesn't really, like I said, it's just sort of an array that doesn't really have any meat to it, and make it an actually useful part of the DOM. The reason why I wanted to do this is that this concept that you see in a lot of frameworks now, is, I think, sort of originated by what we did in jQuery originally, which is effectively instead of operating on a single element at a time, you operate simultaneously against sets of elements. And as it stands right now, the browser doesn't really provide a mechanism for doing that. So I wanted to provide some abilities to make that possible. To start, I'm introducing a new method called create NodeList. And create NodeList works sort of like create element and other functions of that nature. And you can pass in an array of nodes, an object, essentially any object that kind of looks like an array of nodes. So you can pass in, for example, you could pass in that, and it would understand it and turn that into a NodeList as the output. Now, effectively, what I define a NodeList as, because since up until this point there has been no definition of what a NodeList should be, it's just sort of this kind of mysterious sort of list. So what I say is that a NodeList is, has these properties for each individual node that's contained in this container, has a length. Additionally, all the nodes are guaranteed to be in document order. So if you have a whole bunch of elements in it, they will always come out sorted in the correct order in which they're in the document. Additionally, there will be no duplicates. So if you had multiple, if you passed in multiple document bodies, for example, you would only get one body back. So this is sort of to set the ground rules. I mean, this is pretty standard in that all the node lists that you get right now in the DOM have these properties. They work like this. They all come back in document order, and they have no duplicates. So I just wanted to maintain that state. But where the really interesting stuff comes in is if we have this NodeList that's coming from get elements by tag name, query selector, etc., and we have the ability to create custom NodeLists, it becomes really useful to be able to extend the NodeList prototype. So effectively, what my proposal centers around is extending the NodeList prototype with a whole bunch of really useful functionality that we can use in web applications. Additionally, if we don't end up killing off HTML collection, we should make HTML collection inherit from NodeList. Because right now, they're kind of two separate things that don't really inherit from each other. It's all really weird. But again, I think HTML collection should just die. So where you see HTML collection come up is if you do like .children. It's all from the old DOM0 days. Like if you do document.forms, document.links, stuff like that no one ever uses anymore, except in like crazy legacy apps. But that's all HTML collection. So one of the things that's really easy to implement is a chaining-like functionality. And one of the concepts, the way you get a chaining-like thing is that on the NodeList prototype, you introduce a create NodeList method. So that means from any NodeList, you can create another NodeList. And when you do that, the parent node will always point back to where it came from. So just as an example here, so this doesn't work right now, but just to show you as how it would work. So for example, if you got the child nodes from the body element, and you asked for its parent node, you would get back to where it came from. So any NodeList that you get, you can always go back to from whence it came. So additionally, for example, if you did like query selector all, and then you did a query selector all on the result set on the NodeList, you could always get back to that original NodeList again. So in this way, you can very easily traverse through these result sets. And again, so this is something that doesn't work yet, but something I'm proposing. Additionally, on so some of the things I want to see on the NodeList prototype are a whole bunch of array methods. There are a bunch of things that would be very, very useful to be able to use against NodeList. So for example, different ways of looping. So like if being able to have like a for each, map, filter, all of those, and some of the default built-in array methods like slice, concat, things of that nature. Now some of these like slice, concat, map, and slice, concat, map, and filter will all return new NodeLists as a result, since they all modify the NodeList in some way. So for example, we said query selector all, find all the divs, and then we map it. So the map for each and that, and they come from that's been in Firefox now for quite some time, and it's in a part of ECMAScript 5. So here we say, give us all the parent nodes of all the divs, for example. This is an operation that can't be achieved through normal CSS traversal, but it's something that we could do using the power of JavaScript. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of different methods that I want to introduce. And all of these methods typically end up, what I say is they end up bleeding through to the elements themselves. So just as an example, you have traversal. So I showed an example of it. So for example, if you do similar to what I showed before, so you could say get elements by tag name, and then say get elements by class name. So I mean, you could effectively chain these operations together, because it doesn't really make sense now. Because what happens now is that we're restricted to using these methods only on either the document or on an element, and or in the case of the query selector, a document fragment. When it makes a lot of sense to be able to use them against sets of elements simultaneously. So in this way, what we'd be doing is finding all the divs that are on the page, and then finding all the elements with the test class name that are in all these divs. And so what would be happening internally is that it would be concatenating all these result sets together, and then returning one unified NodeList back as a result. So again, like each of these are going to be returning NodeLists again, And again, like the node list will have, for example, the parent node, which is pointing back to the array of divs, or sorry, the node list of divs. So I propose that we bring over a query selector all. I also have some proposals for fixing the selectors API, because right now the selectors API has a lot of missing functionality in it, including there's one that I proposed with scoped query selector all. And additionally, match a selector. So being able to say, do these elements match this particular selector? And additionally, a filter selector. So being able to take a set and reduce it down to a smaller node list that matches a particular selector.
So the parent node property of a node list points to the node list that spawned it?
Yes. Yep.
Is it just me who said that is broken by that?
I mean, I mean, if you, I mean, the thing is that.
I'm cool with the idea.
Sure.
Call it something else. Because,
is that a parent node?
Yeah, because like parent node, like I think of like the node, like I think of like a node's actual parent in a DOM tree. And if you're trying to, like, if in all these other places we're trying to extract what the difference between a node list and an individual node, it seems like that's like what you're calling a parent node for a node list is a different idea than a parent node for a node.
You call it parent set, and then allow yourself to get like a stack trace for your set construction.
That could be. I mean, the reason why I liked parent node in particular, I mean, there's nothing semantically wrong with it, and at least in the fact that it is a parent node. It is still a node. But the thing is that it's it's giving you the ability to to traverse through much in the same way that you would traverse through in a normal DOM tree. So I mean, because theoretically, if you traverse back far enough, if you said parent node, that would give you document. So you would be able to get back from where you came originally. Either way, you did it.
Could be parent node list.
Yeah, it sounds singular. It doesn't sound like a list.
Okay. All right. It's not a huge issue either way, but okay, yeah. Yeah, fine. Parent node list.
Fantasy APIs, I call it heredity.
All right.
Can you propose that?
Let's not talk about fantasy.
So, additionally, I want to make it so that if you call any of the base methods provided in the DOM, so if you call append child, remove child, any of those insert before, anything that can take a DOM node can also take a node list. So, for example, you can say append child node list, and it'll insert every single one of those elements. You no longer have to loop through each individual element and append each one, much in the same way that document fragments work. With the document fragment, you can insert the fragment wholesale, and it works in the same way. You can insert a node list wholesale. So again, anything that can take a DOM node, append child, remove child, everything. Also, it should also implement the event interface. So if you do add event listener, remove event listener, dispatch event, all of those will bleed through to the actual elements themselves. So if you say add event listener, click, it'll add it to each individual element in the node list. Now here's where things start to get really interesting. So since we have this nice API for encapsulating all this functionality, we can actually solve a whole bunch of really hard problems. Namely, there's two problems that I think are particularly interesting. One is the problem of having mutation events, and also the problem of good DOM security. So in the case of mutation events, for example, right now browsers, so some browsers implement mutation events, which allow you to listen to a particular point in the DOM tree and wait, and see like when an attribute has been modified in an element, or when an element has been inserted or removed from the page. It's all really slow, and because the problem is that it's all synchronous. So, like for example, if you have to go through and insert in 500 divs, that's going to trigger 500 events, and each one is going to be on each individual element. It's just fantastically slow. And because the browsers can't delay it, there's no way for them to optimize it. So there was a number of proposals that came out to try and fix mutation events. There's a page on the W3C site where all the browser vendors made different proposals. The only one I felt that had some merit was one proposed by the IE team. And I didn't like the particulars, but the one thing I did like is that the main change that they made was that they made it asynchronous. They just no longer guarantee that the mutation events will occur synchronously. So I effectively take that concept and apply it here. So what happens is, at least in my proposal, like if you do create NodeList, for example, the result that's coming back from that will always be static. The live NodeLists to begin with are really kind of crazy. I think every browser vendor would appreciate if live NodeList just didn't exist, since it would make things a whole lot faster. It wouldn't have to try to maintain this state all over the place. So the way I counteract the existence of these live NodeLists is there's a new query method. So for example here, I'll make this a little bit bigger. Oops. All right. So for example here, we do, this is the example I used earlier. So we do query selector all div. We find all the divs in the page, and then we do a map, and we get all the parents of those divs. So again, this is a selector. This is a traversal that you can't normally do with just plain CSS. This is something that you can only do through a script. So then later on in your code, the page has obviously been updated. Some new divs have come into the page, or some divs have been moved around and they now have new parents. You want to get the current result set. So all you have to do is say parents.query. And this returns the new result set, the new node list, based upon the previous results. So the way it works is it goes back up through the tree. So each individual method that modifies the state, that modifies the node list, that returns a new node list. So for example here, query selector all is modified such that at any point it's possible to go back and requery it again. So we could just say, if we could do a very crude something like this, we could say divs, and then we could do like we could do an interval, and then every 13 milliseconds, requery and do something on those divs. And this will give us the new result set, and it'll requery those results. So in the same way, does
that modify the node list?
It returns a new one. It does not modify. So that's a big thing, is that none of the methods that I propose modify the list itself. It's not immutable, but at least that's just good practice. Just not to. I think that's like one of the things that was done very wrong. Like we have like .reverse, for example, in the array API, and that modifies and like just stuff like that. That was just wrong. Okay, so we can do the query. So not only does the query rerun the query selector all, but it also reruns the map again, and anything else you've chained along the way. So in this way, you can always get the new result set. And when you run the query, you don't have to know what those original steps were to get to the result.
So could you remember how you had parent node for a node list?
Mm-hmm.
Could you crawl up to the parent, and then requery the parent, and then use the end result at the very bottom of all those chained queries? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so and that's exactly what it's doing internally. Is that internally what it's doing is saying, it goes back to this step, it goes back to the map step, and it says, do you have a parent that can requery? Okay, go to the parent first. Then it says, do you have a parent that you can requery? It says no. It runs this query, then it goes back down again. So it's recursive in that way. But the nice thing, so now we have a way to requery a result set. We can add in events. So we can add in an added and removed event to the node list itself. So we can say, okay, when something has been added to the node list or removed from the node list, but it's not limited to just elements or CSS selectors. You can have complex things like functions that can be running and manipulating the state in that way, maps or filters or things of that nature. So what you can do is you can effectively reproduce live events. So you can say, all right, query selector all, find all the divs, set a class on them, and then when new ones are added, set a class on them. So this is going to set a class on all the divs that are in the page now and all the divs that ever will be in the page. And then here's the implementation of live events. It's like 3 lines. So if you say .live, you pass in a function, and it runs against all current elements and all future elements. So I don't think this would be a good thing to land in the first iteration of API, but it'd be something. But it's so easy to write. Like any framework that wants to extend this API can totally write it. Okay, so building so this is something that can provide a great deal of flexibility. Something that isn't capable right now with like delegation, for example. With delegation, you're restricted to only working with events, whereas with this case, you can work with anything. You're modifying classes or what have you. So the next thing is the huge advantage here is security. So I've been talking with Crockford about this, and what's really nice about this particular API style is that it's really easy to secure. And what I mean by secure is that right now within the DOM, anytime you have access to a DOM element, you can walk straight back up the tree, get to the window, and wreak havoc. You can do whatever you want and call. Well, I mean the typical example is you call an alert and you're home free. But I'm introducing a new method called secure, and what that does is if you run it on a NodeList, it returns a new NodeList that is completely locked down. And it's locked down in some very critical ways, in that nodes are no longer accessible on the NodeList itself. So if you say NodeList item at item 0, it's just going to be nothing. It's going to be undefined. Additionally, but that's okay because all the nodes are going to be encapsulated within the NodeList itself. So all the nodes will be there, and so like you could call like .remove or any of the other methods that exist, but without having to access, without exposing the actual DOM nodes. So just as an example here, so if we call query selector all some widget, and you return a secured version of that element, of that node list. For example, so if you try to call parent node or parent node list, that will return null. If you try to walk back up the tree to break out, that'll return an empty node list. Try to access the first element, that'll return undefined. You try to loop through to get to the elements, each of the elements will be null. But what's nice is that even though it looks like it's crippled like this, you can still say, all right, nodes, query selector all, div.foo. Then you could call, like append, some stuff, like you can still perform DOM operations against it, but without exposing to the user that dangerous path of being able to walk back up the tree to get to the window. So again, like this is a DOM API that continues specifically obscures that particular way out. Yes.
What happens when, so you've got methods like append child here, right? So, on a node list, you've got the append child method.
Yeah. So one thing it has. So here, talk about some of those. Yeah. And there you go. Okay.
Okay. So what happens when, say, you give it an argument? I mean, obviously this will be incorrect, but if you say something like, if you've got a node list and you call append child document dot create element div, you've created one div. Whereas you might think you're creating one div for every item in the list, you're really just creating one div and appending it over and over to every item in the collection.
Mm-hmm. So the one thing that obviously that'll have to be worked out, but the way at least we solve it at the moment, at least in jQuery, for example, is that we clone. The first one's the real insertion, and then the second through nth ones are clones of the original. Yes?
What happens if you create a new element just using like I assume you have, in this example, you have access to that element. Like if you append, do you actually have that access if it's secure?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can append to,
If you can create a DOM element that has a reference to an actual element, and you append that, and then use that to walk up?
Well, okay. So to clarify, so there's presumably there's a separate sort of API here that I didn't mention, which is the ability to create DOM nodes, but not through the traditional create element means. Because like right now we don't have, like there isn't an API specified for doing HTML to DOM fragment, and like that needs to exist. And like any of these methods should be able to take a string, HTML string, and be able to still work. In the case, so to clarify what you were saying, you wouldn't be able to call document create element in this secured environment, in this theoretical secured environment, simply because you wouldn't have access to document to begin with. Simply because if you did, then what's the point of having it be secured? You're already free. One thing I want to mention really quick. These are things that I haven't completely specified yet, but it doesn't really matter since their implementation isn't critical. The implementation for these are like 2 or 3 lines per item. It's not massive. What I consider to be the critical part is getting this good initial API out that we can build off of, and in at least getting this specified in browsers so that we can extend it and build better APIs. And then, so one last thing that I wanted to mention, because I think I'm out of time here, is that in order when I'm working on this, and again I'm working with Mozilla IE and the W3C, is I'm working on an implementation. It's a pure JavaScript implementation that implements the full API and a full test suite to go along with it. So for example, here's a test suite. I'm over 500 tests at the moment, and I'm just chugging along and adding more and more tests to prove that this not only works, but is actually feasible and works in current browsers. So hopefully, while we're waiting for browser vendors to implement it, which hopefully shouldn't be that long, we can actually use it in the interim. So any questions really quick before I have to secede to the next person?
Where is this published?
It's not published. I'm publishing this month. It will be up at, I'll be publishing at a couple places, but yeah. So at least my goal is this month to finish the test suite and implementation, and publish those, and then work with Doug Sheppers over at the W3C, and work on a draft of the recommendation. And like I said, I'm already communicating with the IE team and the Mozilla team on implementations. But I'm hoping at the very least that having a test suite and a sample implementation should be enough to get them off the ground and towards implementing it. Yep.
I forget if you said this before, but when you're calling append and appending an entire node list to the document, is your view of the implementation that it would use a document fragment in the interim to apply them all to the document at once, or?
I mean, I'd imagine that internally it would probably work similarly to a document fragment, but it's a little bit different in that, like for example, if you call clone node on a document fragment, that clones the document fragment and incidentally the contents of that fragment. Whereas what I'm proposing is more, everything just passes through. So if you were to theoretically clone the node list, you wouldn't be cloning the node list, you would be cloning the contents of the node list. So another question? Yep.
What's the impact of this work on jQuery? Like, how is it impacting your mindset working on core right now?
So it's impacting in some ways. So I'm deprecating some things in jQuery that just should help to get us towards because I consider this to be a much more pure implementation. I'm also very interested in being able to do that the thing that I mentioned, the dot query, like being able to requery state. Like we don't have that right now in core, but that seems like something that'd be really cool, really useful. So that's something I'm also interested in. I know I have a deprecation page somewhere. Oh, it's up on Etherpad, so yeah, I don't know if that's still there. Yeah, so I've been collecting things that I want to deprecate. But anyway, so yeah, I think some of these are related to the API that I'm working on. Any other questions? Okay, if you have any questions, please feel free to hunt me down, and I'll be able to answer them as best as I can. But yeah, thank you.